Hey, what's going on, guys? Rome Gaming here, back into the video. Today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at Elemental Shaman for Season 1 of Mythic Plus and the War Within. So starting out, just kind of cutting to the chase here, let's take a look at our hero talents first. So we are currently running the Stormbringer tree, and our very top node here, we have Tempest. So just to kind of read it out here, this is more of a passive effect. So every 300 Maelstrom spent replaces your next lightning bolt with Tempest. Now, Tempest itself is not necessarily passive, but what builds up to Tempest is. So Tempest here is a 1.8 second cast. It's going to call down a lightning strike that deals X amount of damage to your target and X amount of nature damage to enemies within 8 yards of the target, and then the damage is going to be reduced beyond 5 targets. So Tempest is very core, and this is something that you're actually going to want to track with a weak R or something, just something to ensure that when this procs, you are pressing it. Tempest does a ton of damage, but we will talk about this a little bit more once we get into the actual rotation itself. Another talent to look at is going to be Conductive Energy here. So Lightning Rod targets now also take 12% of the damage that Tempest deals, and Tempest also applies the Lightning Rod effect. So this means our Tempest can do even more AoE damage if we are spreading our Lightning Rod around. So let's take a look at what Lightning Rod is. Tempest, Earthshock, Elemental Blast, and Earthquake make your target a Lightning Rod for 12 seconds. So Lightning Rod will be very important to our rotation. We will get to that a little bit more in depth once we get to the rotational stuff, but just know that there is some pretty good synergy between Tempest and your Lightning Rod. Then finally, the very bottom node here is going to be Awakening Storms. Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning have a chance to strike your target for X amount of damage. Every 3 times this occurs, your next Lightning Bolt is replaced by Tempest. So we actually have multiple ways to proc our Tempest. It doesn't just have to be through Maelstrom, it can also be through Awakening Storms here. Now, when Tempest does become active, you probably already read this, but your Lightning Bolt becomes replaced with Tempest. So your one ability here will literally turn into Tempest. So when we get into the rotational stuff, we'll kind of take a look at how that looks. And then kind of going into the elemental tree. So this is like a pure lightning build, which is what I really like about it. We're not messing with liquid magma totem, anything like that. Everything here is going to be funneled into our chain lightnings and our earthquakes, which is really fun to me. This is the way that I like to play elemental. There's probably other builds that are better than this, but this seems to be, at least from what I've researched, the main Mythic Plus talent tree that we're using right now. So some of the core talents here, we already talked about Lightning Rod, so we'll kind of go over that when we get more into the rotational stuff. So you always want to make sure that you have your Lightning Shield up, and the reason for that is due to Lightning Capacitor. We'll get more damage while it is up, and then we also have Nature's Protection here, so we'll take less damage as well while that Lightning Shield is up. Another shield you need to be kind of focused on is Earth Shield. We're running Earth Shield with Elemental Orbit, which means that we can put Earth Shield on an ally. So typically you'll put this on yourself and the tank as well. Some of the core talents that we're also running, I guess cooldowns you could say, is going to be Storm Elemental. So we're taking that over a Fire Elemental. We're also taking Stormkeeper down here kind of in the middle. And this is going to be a 1 minute cooldown. This is where a lot of your burst damage and Maelstrom generation will come, is from the Stormkeeper. And one thing that's really nice about Stormkeeper is this will trigger an Elemental Overload. So to quickly cover what Elemental Overload is, this is going to be our mastery. The way this works is your spells have a chance to essentially overload and cast themselves again, of course, at reduced effectiveness. So in this specific case, you only get 35% of the normal damage and Maelstrom. This is one of the things that makes Elemental Shaman so fun to play, is your spells will overload, they'll cast additional times, and you just kind of have spells going all over the place. So really cool passive. I like it more than a lot of the other boring masteries. This one, you actually see it happen. So Stormbringer will trigger that elemental overload. Another talent we're running is Aftershock. So Aftershock is, it basically has a 25% chance to refund all the Maelstrom that we do spend. So the problem with this spell is it does make Elemental Shaman a little bit spammy. I don't really mind it, but sometimes you will get a scenario where you can just kind of spam Earthquake over and over and over, like 4 times in a row, and it can become kind of tedious, right? Because you're getting all that Maelstrom refunded to you. So sometimes when this does proc in certain ways, it can be kind of difficult to dump all that Maelstrom. We're also running Ice Fury here, so your spells have a chance to proc Ice Fury, which will make your next 4 Frost Shocks do 200% increased damage. So when we get into the rotational stuff, we'll cover Ice Fury a little bit more. We also have Earthquake versus Earthshock. So Earthshock's going to be like your main single target damage spender. It's going to cost Maelstrom. And then we also have Earthquake. It's going to be your main AoE Maelstrom spender. Earthquake also has a chance to knock enemies down, and like we said earlier, this will also apply your Lightning Rod. Earthshock, Elemental Blast, there's a few other spells that will proc Lightning Rod as well, but just know that your Earthquake will also proc it. And then we're also running Echo of the Elements. It's going to give Lava Burst an additional charge, and then Master of the Elements here. That's going to increase the damage of our next spell after Lava Burst. So we want to be weaving in Lava Burst into our rotation to kind of beef up some of our additional spells. And then we also have our Ascendance, which is really cool right now because when you press it, it's going to put a Flame Shock on all the targets around you, and it's going to shoot out a Lava Burst at them. This is also going to increase the effectiveness of our Mastery Elemental Overload. So this is just another really fun button to press. You kind of see that as a recurring theme here. The Elemental Shaman has a lot of just fun spells to play around. They are a very flashy spec and probably one of my favorite casters to play. And then the last thing I'm going to go over here, there's probably some other stuff that I missed, but just to kind of move on with the guide, we also have Deeply Rooted Elements. So Earth Shock, Elemental Blast, Earthquake, they have a 7% chance to activate our Ascendance for us for 6 seconds. So at any time during your rotation, you have a random chance to proc your Ascendance. So for our secondary stats, we'll be focused on Mastery over Haste, over Critical Strike, then over Versatility. You see this is not a super geared character, so my secondary stats are a little bit out of place. But we really want to focus on Mastery because if you remember, if we go back to our tree here and we type in, just type in Mastery, you can see all the different things that funnel into our Elemental Overload. And it's actually even better. Let me type Overload. That gives a better picture. You can see right down the middle of the tree here how many different things synergize with our Elemental Overload. So that's pretty much the main reason that we focus on Mastery is because we have so many individual talents that synergize with it. Our secondary stat, our next secondary stat is going to be Haste because due to unlimited power here, that gives us this stacking sort of haste effect. So we get 1% haste, multiple applications may overlap as we spend our Maelstrom. We also have our Storm Elemental that will give us some haste. This is also like a stacking effect. And then we also have down here, sort of at the bottom, our haste is increased by 20% while our Ascendance is active. So once again, just a lot of different talents that kind of synergize with haste. Now, Elemental Shaman also synergizes with Critical Strike as well. So if we type in Critical Strike, you can see we have Nature's Fury that gives us Critical Strike. We have Flash of Lightning that gives us more crit chance. We also have a big one, Primordial Fury. That's not the one I was looking for. Yeah, Elemental Fury. So your Critical Strikes deal 275% damage instead of the usual 200%. So the reason that we're not really running, or we don't really prioritize Critical Strike as much as Haste and Mastery, is because Lava Burst will always Critical Strike if there's a Flame Shock on the target. So all that Critical Strike kind of gets wasted if Lava Burst is going to Critical Strike regardless. If our crit rating's 95% or if it's 2%, it's always going to Critical Strike if that Lava or if that Flame Strike is up. So that's why it's number 3. And then finally, Versatility. It's like this for most DPS specs. Versatility will be the last secondary stat. Mainly, you want Versatility for survivability more than anything. Okay, let's quickly go over some of our spells here. So we have Lightning Bolt. It's going to generate some Maelstrom. It does single target damage. This is your main single target damage filler spell. We also have our Flame Shock. You put it on the target. It does some ticking fire damage. And this is what makes our Lava Burst Critical Strike. So typically, you go into a pool. You want to make sure you're putting Flame Shock up on all your targets. Up next, we have our Lava Burst. So basically, it's on an 8-second cooldown. You get 2 charges of it. It generates Maelstrom. And then if Flame Shock, so the previous spell we talked about, is on the target, it will always Critical Strike. We also have our Frost Shock, which is an instant cast spell. You're typically going to use this during movement. We talked about Ice Fury earlier and how sometimes Ice Fury will proc. Basically, what will happen is it will turn your Frost Shock into Ice Fury, and then Ice Fury is going to buff your next 4 Frost Shocks. So just show you guys what that looks like. Ice Fury is right here. And see, it's on my 4 spell, or on my 4 key down here. That will just turn to Ice Fury when it procs. Use Ice Fury, then it goes back to a buffed up Frost Shock, which will then glow. We also have Earth Shock, which we kind of talked about already. It's your main single target Maelstrom spender. We have Chain Lightning, which is going to be your main AOE filler, so kind of the opposite of Lightning Bolt. And then we also have Earthquake here as well, which is going to be your main AOE Maelstrom spender. Okay, let's talk a little bit about utility now. So Shaman has a ton of utility, and it's one of the main reasons that we're even brought to groups in the first place, just all the utility that we bring. We're just kind of in a unique situation right now where we do the most damage and we bring the best utility. So we're like Giga S tier right now. So I don't know how much I really want to go into this just because there's so much stuff here. We'll just kind of talk about some of the main stuff. So we already talked about our shields. We got our Earth Shield and our Lightning Shield. Keep Lightning Shield up on you for more damage and damage reduction. Keep Earth Shield up on you in the tank for increased healing and, damage reduction as well. And I might be thinking of Restoration Shaman for the damage reduction. I don't think you get damage reduction through Earth Shield for Elemental Shaman. I think you just get the healing, actually. We also have our Earth Elemental. You can kind of drop that. If the tank dies, you can drop your Earth Elemental to taunt all the mobs. This is really good to kind of get a battle res off. It'll buy your healer or whoever's the battle res a couple seconds to get that cast off. Now, in high keys, Earth Elemental is only going to last for a few seconds. He's going to get absolutely nuked, so just kind of be aware of that. We also have our Ancestral Guidance here on a 2-minute cooldown. Basically, it converts your healing into damage and your damage into healing. Your healer will absolutely love this spell. I typically like to pair this with a big boss mechanic. It's going to do a whole bunch of AoE damage. You can pop this and it can offset an entire mechanic. It does a lot of healing. We have our Healing Surge, which is just, you can kind of use that for off healing if needed. Don't really recommend to press it too much, though, to be honest. And that brings us to our very first totem here. We have our Earthbind totem on a 30-second cooldown. There'll be unique situations in Mythic Plus where you can drop this. It can also help the tank kind of kite out. And I guess I'll just go ahead and group defensives in this section as well. So we have our Astral Shift. You only got a couple defensives. Astral Shift is going to be one of them. You take 40% less damage for 12 seconds. Our other one is going to be Stone Bulwark. And this is actually a pretty good one. You place it down, you get a big shield on you. It's on a 3-minute cooldown. So actually pretty decent defensives, to be honest. We also have our Bloodlust ability, 5-minute cooldown. You get the sated effect. This is going to grant your whole party a whole bunch of haste, so you really want to coordinate this with your group. You probably have other specs or classes who could also use Bloodlust. So depending on your group composition, you may be the one who has to press this button, maybe not. It just depends. We also have our Capacitor totem. You just kind of drop it on the ground. It does a huge AoE stun. This is actually very powerful when paired with something like your Thunderstorm, because you can go into a pack and your Thunderstorm can knock all the mobs up. You can drop a Capacitor totem on top of that, and you can pretty much lock an entire pack of mobs for like 3 or 4 seconds. It's very strong. Now, one thing about Thunderstorm is it will only knock the mobs up if you are taking the Thundershock talent. So it knocks enemies up instead of away. If you do not take this talent, it will knock the mobs away from you. So you will kind of troll the group without it. We also have, we have our Cleanse Spirit. This will remove all curse effects from the target, which is pretty good. We have our Ghost Wolf. So you can just kind of shift in and out of your Ghost Wolf to kind of move around. That's a big part of our mobility is Ghost Wolf, so make sure you're using it. We have our Purge for magic effects. There'll be certain bosses and mechanics that you can use Purge on. Cannot think of any specific examples off the top of my head, but you can use it Mythic Plus. Any sort of shields, typically you can remove with a Purge. We have our Sky Fury, so this was just introduced in the War Within, and you press it, and it gives your party a buff that gives Mastery, which is really nice because Mastery is our best secondary stat. We also have our Wind Shear here, which is the shortest ranged interrupt in the game, so make sure you're using that from pack to pack. We have Spirit Walker's Grace, which is just going to increase our movement speed by 20%, and it's going to allow us to cast spells while moving. So make sure you're kind of using this. Typically just save it for a boss fight when there's movement required. We also have our Totemic Recall on a 2-minute cooldown, so resets the cooldown of your most recently used totem with a base cooldown shorter than 3 minutes. So what you can do is you can cap totem, then Totemic Recall, and you can cap totem again. There is a DR, though, if you do double cap totem in a row. So just kind of be wary of that. You won't get as long of a stun effect. So typically, you can use it on cap totem. You can use it on Earthbind as well. I don't believe it works on Stone Bulwark totem. We can test it real quick. Let's see. Yeah, I messed up the recording there, but I just tested it and it did not work. So I'm pressing it right now. It says you can't do that yet. So typically, yeah, use it with Earthbind or your cap totem. That's pretty much it in terms of like utility base spells. We have our cooldowns. We talked about most of this stuff already. We have also Lava Surge. We've not talked about this yet. So your Flame Shock ticks have a chance to basically make your next Lava Burst become an instant cast, and you'll know this happens because there will be a little weak R effect that kind of pops up with sort of lava on the side of your screen, and then you can just kind of shoot out your Lava Burst. Okay, now let's just kind of talk about how do you even play Elemental Shaman, like what should you kind of be focusing on. So the main thing is you do not want to waste your Maelstrom. So if you do overcap your Maelstrom, you're quite literally wasting damage. You're throwing it out the window. So that is always your number one priority. No matter what your rotation is, it doesn't matter. Do not overcap on Maelstrom. So typically you want to spend as soon as you possibly can. You really don't want your Maelstrom bar getting too high, and you typically want to be on the lower end of your Maelstrom bar. And then we're also pretty cooldown intensive spec, so you want to be using your cooldowns pretty much whenever they come up. There's not many good situations to hold on to your cooldown for too long. My kind of rule of thumb is as long as you can get the full duration of your cooldown, go ahead and use it. And then we also have a ton of procs. We're a proc-based sort of spec. So we're going to have a lot of things like Awakening Storms. We're going to have Tempest that procs. We're going to have Elemental Overloads that we then have to spend on Earth Shock versus Earthquake. We're going to have a Lava Burst that procs. So there's going to be a lot of kind of random things happening. Okay, let's get to the good stuff, the single target rotation. I'm sure that's probably like 90% of the reason you people even clicked on the video. However, there are beginners, so I do like to kind of cover everything in my guides. So your first priority is going to be cooldowns. So you want to go into a Storm Elemental, into a Storm Keeper, into an Ascendance, and then Tempest whenever that does become available. So it becomes cooldowns, then Tempest essentially. Our next priority will be to refresh Flame Shock if it becomes under 12 seconds. And I actually have this little notepad thing that should make this a little bit easier for us to follow through. I'll probably do this in our future guides. So we pretty much talked about everything up to here. All right, so use your cooldowns, use Tempest when available, and then Flame Shock below 12 seconds. Then your next priority is if you do kind of get towards the cap, you do want to be using, just kind of depending on your talents, Elemental Blast or Earth Shock, depending on what you took. We take Earth Shock. From here, we'll Ice Fury if we don't have the Fusion of Elements buff active. That's one thing that we have not talked about yet, so let's take a look at what that even is. So that's going to be right here, Fusion of Elements. After casting Ice Fury, the next time you cast a damaging nature and fire spell, you additionally cast Elemental Blast to your target at 60% effectiveness. So we don't want to cast this if we don't want to cast Ice Fury if this buff is active, because we're basically essentially wasting the buff. So you want to get rid of the buff first and then cast Ice Fury. And then from here, we just kind of go into our fillers. So we'll use our Lava Burst, we'll use our Earth Shock, we'll use our Lightning Bolt, and then if we need to move, we will be using our Frost Shock during movement phases. Okay, and then moving on to the AOE sort of rotation. So again, it's pretty much the same thing as a single target, just we replace a couple things here. So we're still sending our cooldown, Storm Elemental, Storm Keeper. We're going to make sure that we're syncing our Storm Keeper with our Ascendants. And this is going to be a great time to use like any sort of trinkets, potions, whatever externals you have. Make sure to use it now. Then whenever our Tempest does proc, we want to use that. And then from here, we kind of go into our fillers, right? We go into our Earthquake. That's going to be our main Maelstrom spender in AoE scenarios. Opposite of Earth Shock, into Chain Lightnings, into Ice Furies, and Frost Shocks. So this is what I love about this spec is quite literally, for the most part, this is what you're focused on. Use Tempest. I mean, obviously send your cooldowns, but use Tempest and then Chain Lightning and Earthquake. So pretty simple. I mean, it's very straightforward, very fun to play. Just take a quick look at that in action here. So we'll be using, again, a Storm Elemental into a Storm Keeper into our Ascendants. No Tempest is available. So we're just quite literally spamming Chain Lightning into Earth Shocks. Tempest is available. Go ahead and send it. Tempest is available again. Make sure we're not capping on Maelstrom. And that right there is the bulk of your AoE rotation. Now take a look at the single target rotation. I don't have my cooldowns, but let's just pretend that I go ahead and sent them. So we'll send your cooldowns. We will Tempest when that becomes available. Then we will Flame Shock. I do not have an Earth Shock, so I will go into Lava Burst and Lightning Bolts. I now have an Earth Shock, into a Tempest, into a Lava Burst, excuse me, into another Tempest, into a Lava Burst, into more Lightning Bolts. It's about as simple as a rotation can get, to be honest with you. Earth Shock when they become available, Lava Burst when it becomes available, cooldowns when they become available. Now we have our Ice Fury that procs, so we can send that. And yeah, that's pretty much it for that. I just realized I didn't have sound on for that, but that's totally fine. Let's quickly take a look at our tier set bonus. So our 2 set is Earth Shock's damage increased by 25%. Earthquake damage increased by 25%, very easy. The 4-set Spending Maelstrom grants you 5% increased critical strike chance and 10% increased critical strike damage for 5 seconds. So that quite literally means any Maelstrom, you could spend 1 Maelstrom, it doesn't matter. You're going to get that buff when you spend Maelstrom. Okay, and then these are going to be our best in slot enchants, and then our best in slot consumes. Going to put some screenshots up on the screen right now. Then these are going to be our best in slot gems. All right, guys, then we will be putting weak Rs and add-ons in the description of the video, so make sure to check that out. That's going to be it for this one, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you on the next one.